I guess I want to begin with saying that my career, I've spent a lot of my career chairing, directing women's and gender studies programs, and I think just looking back, some of the struggles that I've had are sort of creating a curriculum that all brings together the most productive aspects of feminist studies, critical race studies, and understanding of postcolonial studies. So those things have been very formative to my career. But my arguments in terms of being directing these programs have been mostly about the very practical aspects of how to get full lines in a program so there's somebody to do the work, which is very important. And that the kinds of ways in which these arguments about full lines in these programs become really vexed because of questions from administrators regarding, well, then you'll be very narrow, won't you? Then what will you do? Because there are other feminists in, anthropology and sociology and literature, and what are you doing? That's different, right? And that is framing. And then the question is that if you are in these small programs, you need to show that you're contributing to the university. So what you end up doing is sort of saying, yes, and I'm part of this unit, and I'm part of that unit, and I'm in this place, and I'm in that place. So the kind of flexible aspect of neoliberal flexibility has been, around for like 25 years, I would say, in terms of sort of coming back to what you're saying. In the kind of political moment that we are in right now, shifting to the present, I think that the kind of renewed emphasis on American empire is very critical to think about these days, and the kinds of forms that the empire takes, this kind of expropriation, disavowals, non-belongings, and belongings that happen. One of the ways in which I've seen, sort of being at Yale, there's been a whole impetus to create another university that has the global brand of Yale in Singapore, and the debates around what will be able to be taught in that area and what won't. So the question is that the document is being produced is saying very much, well, what the American university does is liberal arts. However, when we raise the question of will we be able to teach about sexuality in Singapore, they said, well, of course, we'll create this little zone where you can be able to teach, it will be safe. So the question is, what is that liberal art that is being exported now to different parts of the world under the kind of sign of the success of the American university, and what aspects of critique from gender and sexuality studies it gets left behind? In these debates, you often feel like you're like, an Indian phrase has it, stone in the lentil. You're sort of like making an argument that nobody wants to hear. So I've been very taken by some of these questions about what one has to do these days. And predominantly what I want to think about is the kind of expropriation of empire that's happening and how we deal with that. And so we're told, well, of course, we are in this moment that is post-feminist, post-racist, post-everything. But at the same time, poor Obama is both black and also Kenyan. He can't be anything else, of course. And of course, we're also told, many of our students do believe that feminism is not required anymore, that we have. You need it in the Congo, where women are being raped, but you really don't need it here. So those are some of the ways in which one's curriculum has to, in fact, deal with the kinds of be anti-racist, anti-colonial, anti-heteronormative, feminist, this kind of deal with this sort of U.S. culture that is trying to outsource the problems elsewhere and say what we're doing has to happen somewhere else, not here, and what that produces for the U.S. itself. So I've been thinking very much about how does one teach against it? How do you embed kind of gender, sexuality, critical race, postcolonial studies in that project? And I think one always has to be both attentive to the political problem that one problem solving, but also attentive to curriculum making, which becomes a different kind of problem as well. So the question has always been, and I want to think of this with you, what are the foundation discourses? Do we want to have foundational discourse? Because that's what the disciplines, the kind of hegemonic disciplines, as I think of them, had. And this argument about the kind of the books that have to be read to be foundational to what we're doing. So in that sense, some of what the curriculum work that Laura also mentioned in her paper was thinking through some of those questions about producing a different set of foundations other than the hallowed texts of whatever our field might be. And also the question about what one does also has to be political, right? In the sense that we want to produce students who are attuned to the kind of geopolitical that I mentioned in my paper, that only sort of somebody who can think about transnationally in this complex register of some of the questions that I discussed can talk about. Like, how is it that we can make clear to our students why the kind of representation of the raped women in the Congo is a problem, right? So what is that problematic? And to separate something that we need to think about as well. So there's so much in that whole form of representation, which is about very fundamentally about colonialism, about race, about postcoloniality, about gender, about feminism. So much goes into just some sort of unpacking that. And how do we begin that? The problem of Arizona. How do we begin to think about those very, very deep questions of contemporary politics and so on? So the geopolitical complexity I've argued, and I've sort of argued this through a lot of my work, is that to denaturalize the nation and its territorial claims, the meta-narratives of the global, and you were also talking about this very much, the kind of discourse of civilization, the world orders, the posts, all of these, the claims to singularity that you were mentioning, the problem of the singular and the exceptional, which I think is something that we need to think about as well, to think about connectivities and divergences, and I bring that also from thinking about the kinds of ways in which we need to think of cultural formations that are not easily translatable, that are incommensurable, but that we need to think about other worlds, other cosmologies, and the problem of languages that's related to that. How do we think of those? And that's not just about languages as well. So I've argued that in a way you can't get away from these political projects, but at the same time the logic of the curriculum has to be both related to it and to be a broader formation that is attuned to the kind of university you're in, the kinds of projects, the kinds of spaces that are possible, and the different names and the different collaborations one has to think about in terms of the kinds of changes that I've seen. I mean, I've moved from a place where there was a school of ethnic studies to an elite university that has absolutely no ethnic studies. So the question of what I'm interested in, in the ways in which elite places allow certain research universities allow some cultural difference and what they don't allow, is an interesting thing that I'm puzzling through at this point. So just in terms of thinking about some of these questions about the problem, and that I've also felt that again, coming back to how what we do in all our different fields is to bring together that we have a language. I really do believe we have a theoretical and interesting language that allows us to speak to each other across different fields in this room, that when I say certain terms, we're all clear, we all understand much of what the problematic is, and I can see that from the nodding heads. And that means that we have some way to think through them, we can produce a conversation, and it's also about producing the community as well through these conversations. And in each place, I think that what's been really interesting is how different the community becomes. What that community can be is shaped as much by the politics of the university as it is by a geopolitical kind of set of questions and about the fields we're in. So I think that we can provide in the kinds of arguments that one has to make to the university has to be both really, really narrow, like what are the criteria the provost says will give you lines, and you have to work through those. At the same time, you have to say, because we haven't had any full lines in the last 10 years, and therefore we need to have them, that kind of argument. And I just got a note from Rupal Oza, which is asking us to support her in having more lines in women's studies at Hunter. But the kind of question about the particularity of the institutional space and the general theoretical, geopolitical, topical problem we have to solve is sort of the space in which I think we are.